For 30 years, the blue curtain parted. Johnny Carson strode to his mark, delivered his monologue, and settled behind his desk with the effortless precision of a man who had done it 10,000 times. To the millions watching at home, The Tonight Show was television's most dependable nightly comfort, polished, predictable, and perfectly assembled. But behind that well-oiled machine lurked a chaotic reality that rarely made it past the cameras. The sometimes alarming, often unpredictable state of the celebrities waiting nervously backstage. Johnny had a sixth sense about it the moment they walked out, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson throughout the 1970s. He could tell within seconds if someone was drunk, stoned, coked up, or worse. His eyes would get this certain look, part amusement, part, oh God, here we go. While Carson maintained his legendary cool on camera, the production team had developed an elaborate system of signals and backup plans to handle what was in reality a surprisingly common occurrence. Major celebrities arriving at America's most prestigious talk show in states of significant chemical alteration. Production assistants were trained to watch for warning signs. Segment producers had emergency protocols. If Carson touched his tie while introducing a guest, it was code for "this person is not entirely sober." If he straightened his cards twice, the director knew to keep camera shots simple because things were about to get unpredictable. The 70s were wild, admitted the former producer. You'd have legitimate legends, Oscar winners, musical icons, literary giants, showing up so impaired they could barely remember their own names. Johnny somehow had to make it all look normal while essentially babysitting someone having an entirely different experience of reality. To understand why this happens so frequently, one has to understand the unique pressure cooker that was The Tonight Show's green room. Unlike the pre-scripted, heavily rehearsed talk show appearances that dominate television today, Carson insisted on genuine, unplanned conversation. That terrified people. A good appearance could launch a career overnight. A bad one could haunt a celebrity for years. And so, with the always-stocked green room bar offering top-shelf everything, and with an era that held a decidedly permissive attitude toward recreational substances, many celebrities reached for chemical courage before facing television's most powerful interviewer. George Carlin, the functioning stoner. George Carlin transformed from clean-cut comedian to counterculture hero during the early 1970s, growing his hair, overhauling his material, and embracing the era's drug culture with the enthusiasm of a true convert. His Tonight Show appearances reflected this transformation completely. He riffed like a genius and grinned like a stoner, remembered a camera operator who worked many of Carlin's segments. There was never any question. George wasn't hiding it. That slightly glazed look in his eyes was practically part of his brand by then. Carlin appeared on The Tonight Show over 130 times, establishing himself as one of Carson's most reliable and beloved guests. Yet despite this apparent endorsement, Carson never selected him as a guest host, a distinction extended to many other comedians of far less talent. The unspoken reason was reliability. Johnny enjoyed George enormously and respected his brilliance, explained a former Tonight Show writer. But he knew George's lifestyle and wasn't confident he could handle the responsibility of running the show for 90 minutes. What made Carlin unique among the show's chemically enhanced guests was his remarkable functionality. Unlike others who became incoherent or erratic, Carlin remained sharp, witty, and professional, just with a distinctly relaxed philosophical vibe. Carson adapted accordingly, asking open-ended questions, and then sitting back, letting Carlin's mind wander into the fascinating, often hilarious territory that made him a counterculture icon. Carlin himself later confirmed what everyone already suspected, writing in his autobiography, "Was I usually stoned during my Carson spots in the 70s? Of course I was. It was the 70s and I was George Carlin. Do the math." Richard Pryor, comedy's raw nerve exposed. If Carlin represented the functional end of the spectrum, Richard Pryor embodied something far more volatile. A genius comedian whose substance issues sometimes pushed Tonight Show appearances from brilliant to genuinely concerning in the blink of an eye. He was hilarious until he got cosmic, recalled a stage manager who worked several of Pryor's appearances. Richard could start a segment as the sharpest, funniest person on the planet. Then suddenly his eyes would change and he'd go somewhere else mentally. Johnny would have to work like a traffic cop to get things back on track. Pryor's relationship with cocaine was complicated and well documented, becoming increasingly destructive throughout the 1970s and culminating in his infamous 1980 freebasing accident. Several of his Tonight Show appearances captured him at different points along this trajectory. During one particularly memorable 1978 segment, Pryor began discussing his childhood, only for the anecdote to gradually dissolve into a disconnected series of observations, his focus visibly drifting as the audience laughed nervously, unsure if this was intentional. Carson stepped in with a quick redirect, made a joke to cover the awkward pause, and smoothly transitioned to a commercial. It was masterful crisis management disguised as casual conversation, the stage manager recalled. Carson's handling of Pryor revealed something important about his character. He genuinely loved the comedian's genius, worked tirelessly to showcase him at his best, and shielded his most vulnerable moments from exploitation. According to a former NBC executive, Carson would sometimes check on Pryor through mutual friends after particularly erratic appearances, not out of judgment, but out of genuine concern for a man he admired. Truman Capote, literary genius, television disaster. Not all chemically enhanced appearances involve the controlled chaos of working comedians. Sometimes the most alarming incidents came from unexpected corners, as demonstrated by Truman Capote's infamous January 1980 appearance, an evening that became legendary for all the wrong reasons. America's literary darling, completely baked, was how one production assistant succinctly described it. Capote had appeared on the show many times over the years, displaying the sharp wit and incisive observations that made him a talk show treasure. But this night was categorically different. He was slurring so badly he could barely be understood. His head kept nodding forward before he would snap back with a startled expression, seemingly surprised to find himself on television. The control room was in a quiet panic. Carson's response to Capote was markedly different from his handling of Carlin or Pryor. Viewers at home watched his smile tighten and his questions simplify as he attempted to salvage what was rapidly becoming an unwatchable segment. The moment they cut to commercial, he walked backstage and told the talent coordinator plainly, "Never again. He's done." What angered Carson wasn't merely the impairment itself, but what it represented: a fundamental lack of respect for the show and its audience. There was, in Carson's mind, a critical distinction between a performer who arrived chemically loosened but could still deliver, and one who arrived essentially non-functional. Capote had crossed that line decisively. The incident led directly to tighter backstage monitoring of guest conditions before airtime, more careful regulation of the green room bar, and a lifetime ban that remained in place for the rest of Carson's tenure. It became the show's defining cautionary tale about where tolerance ended. Cheech and Chong, truth in advertising. Some Tonight Show guests made no pretense whatsoever about their relationship with recreational substances, and none more famously than comedy duo Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong, whose entire creative identity was built around cannabis culture. They weren't acting, laughed a former segment producer who worked on several of their appearances throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. That's just where their brains lived. What made Cheech and Chong unique in this company was Carson's willingness to incorporate their state directly into the comedy itself. Rather than working around their obvious cannabis consumption, Carson played the perfectly pitched straight man to their stoner antics, feigning innocent confusion about drug references and asking earnest questions that set them up beautifully. Everyone in the room, the guests, Carson, the audience, was in on the joke, and that shared understanding created some of the most genuinely entertaining television of the era. During one memorable appearance promoting their film Up in Smoke, Chong embarked on a rambling, wonderfully disconnected production anecdote. Rather than redirect him, Carson simply let it unspool, glancing at the camera with a raised eyebrow that had the audience howling. Johnny was essentially telling the audience, "Yes, they're exactly who you think they are," explained the segment producer. It wasn't about exposing or embarrassing them. It was about authenticating their brand. Carson always maintained that his primary job was to make his guests look good. With Cheech and Chong, that meant letting them be exactly, unapologetically themselves. Peter Fonda, easy rider, difficult guest. The counterculture revolution of the 1960s brought new substances and new attitudes crashing into the conventions of network television, sometimes with spectacular results, as happened during Peter Fonda's now legendary 1970 appearance. He talked about time travel. The segment lasted 5 minutes, recalled a director who worked that night, neatly summarizing one of the strangest interviews in Tonight Show history. Fonda, already famous for Easy Rider and his open advocacy of psychedelics, arrived for his scheduled appearance seemingly under the influence of what backstage staff strongly suspected was LSD. His pupils were dramatically dilated. He kept staring at the studio lights, then at his own hands, then snapping back to attempt an answer to a question Carson had asked half a minute earlier. Carson shifted immediately into damage control, asking only the simplest possible questions and maintaining a pleasantly neutral expression while scanning for the earliest appropriate exit. The breaking point came when a standard question about upcoming projects veered abruptly into a meditation on how time is not linear but wrapped around us like a blanket and how humanity is collectively riding the cosmic wave of consciousness. Carson tapped his cards twice on the desk, the emergency signal for an immediate commercial break. They were only 5 minutes into a scheduled 12-minute interview. When the show returned from the break, Fonda had been quietly replaced by the next guest, with no explanation offered. Carson simply continued as though nothing unusual had occurred. Notably, he expressed no lasting anger about the incident. Everyone has off nights, he reportedly told his producers. Give him another chance in a year or so. Fonda did return in later years, delivering considerably more terrestrial interviews. Oliver Reed, the British Bulldog, unleashed. Not every chemically enhanced appearance was merely amusing or manageable. British actor Oliver Reed's 1975 visit demonstrated how quickly substance use could transform entertainment into something genuinely threatening. Reed, already notorious in Britain for his hard-drinking persona, arrived visibly intoxicated, and what began as slurred but workable responses escalated rapidly. You could see Johnny's expression change the moment he realized this wasn't just a guy who'd had a few drinks, recalled a stage manager. This was someone volatile who might do anything. The situation deteriorated sharply when Reed began interrupting Carson's questions with non-sequiturs and sudden shouts. At one point, he stood up unexpectedly and began demonstrating a fighting stance, prompting security personnel to quietly move closer to the stage. Carson's response was entirely different from his management of other impaired guests. There was no gentle guidance, no playful adaptation. He took firm, visible control, interrupting Reed's rambling, redirecting forcefully, and cutting the segment significantly short. After the appearance, his position was unambiguous. Oliver Reed would not be returning to The Tonight Show. I don't care how big a star someone is, Carson reportedly told his booking staff. If they can't control themselves, they don't sit at my desk. Reed joined an extremely short list of performers permanently banned from the show. The incident drew a clear line between chemical enhancement that created memorable television and intoxication that threatened the entire atmosphere Carson had spent decades carefully constructing. Sammy Davis Jr., the ultimate entertainer's secret fuel. Some Tonight Show appearances became legendary not for obvious disaster, but for the persistent whispers that followed. None generated more lasting industry speculation than Sammy Davis Jr.'s hyperkinetic 1974 interview, which left viewers and insiders alike wondering what exactly was powering one of entertainment's greatest performers. Davis was a Carson favorite, a consummate entertainer whose combination of musical talent, comedic instinct, and endlessly fascinating life stories made him television gold. But his 1974 appearance stood out for its unusually electric energy. He was talking at extraordinary speed, unable to sit still, perpetually interrupting himself to chase new thoughts. Industry insiders recognized what many casual viewers missed: the telltale signs of cocaine use that had become increasingly prevalent in entertainment circles by the mid-1970s. Carson adapted to Davis's elevated state with characteristic skill, allowing his rapid-fire storytelling to flow while providing gentle navigational guidance. He never mentioned the subject directly, not even to his own staff afterward. His only acknowledgement came during a commercial break when he wiped his brow and murmured, "I think I just got secondhand exhaustion from that interview." What distinguished the Davis situation from more problematic appearances was that his professionalism never wavered. Whatever was powering the performance, Davis remained charming, entertaining, and fully in command of his craft, just with the volume turned considerably higher. When a reporter later asked Davis directly about that particular appearance, he reportedly smiled and replied simply, "Baby, the 70s were the 70s. Let's leave it at that." Johnny's balancing act. Taken together, these 7 appearances reveal as much about Johnny Carson as they do about the celebrities involved. He was navigating a genuine cultural revolution in real time, finding a workable middle ground between reflecting the era's dramatically shifting attitudes toward substances and maintaining the standards appropriate for broadcast television, reaching millions of American homes each night. His approach was guided by what his staff informally called an impairment spectrum, a pragmatic, nuanced philosophy that prioritized entertainment value and professional respect over moral judgment. George Carlin, stone but brilliant, no problem. Truman Capote, incoherent and barely conscious, unacceptable. The distinction was never about the substances themselves. It was about respecting the audience and honoring the medium. Carson was consistently protective of his guests, even when they created their own problems, working twice as hard to give struggling performers a soft landing rather than exploiting their condition for easy ratings. The exceptions came only when behavior crossed into genuine aggression, hostility, or complete non-functionality. The 3 unbreakable rules that ended careers at his desk. In a media landscape utterly transformed from his era, it is striking to consider how differently these moments would be received today. A celebrity appearing visibly impaired on a major talk show would now generate social media firestorms, think pieces, and mandatory apology tours. In Carson's domain, these were largely treated as amusing footnotes rather than career-defining scandals, managed gracefully and moved past with dignity and tact. That was ultimately the essence of what made Carson irreplaceable, not the monologue, not the desk, but the rare human intelligence that could turn chaos into compelling television while making sure everyone walked away with their dignity still reasonably intact.